welcome back to Oshkosh Live. I'm Ryan. This is Sean. And you might recognize this face here. This is Pete Muntean from CNN. He's not just any aviation reporter. He is a pilot. He's had you've been around this industry a long time.
Yep. Grew up in it.
I remember, so you're from the Maryland area. I am too. I remember watching you on
Me too.
local. And you are too. I forgot. I'm sorry.
Go Terps.
Go Terps.
Thank you.
And
you're not the first person to say go Terps this week.
I remember growing up and watching you in high school. I
was on Channel 9 for a while.
On Channel 9, WUSA 9.
Yeah. I spent 10 years in local news, which was very different than covering national news. You know, I was covering like everything from state government and politics to cats and trees. And now I cover only aviation, which is like the dream gig. You know, like this is something I love aviation more than anything. And sadly, there's a lot of incidents lately, but you know, there's a lot of joy in aviation too, and I just can't get enough of it. And like, what better place to be to talk about aviation than Oshkosh?
Can I start with a heavy-hitting
Sure,
question?
try me.
Can we get a shot of his water bottle and all the stickers on it? So maybe a little bit of stories. I don't know if this is like, for me, my guitar case has the stickers of all the places I've been. So Pete, tell us what we're looking at here.
It's honestly an amalgamation of all of these stickers that I've collected at Osh. I have a big hangar party every year at my hangar at Potomac Airfield in Maryland. And so this one is from Petapalooza. It's got my Super Decathlon on it. I've got previous years here. I've got my friend Kevin's Aranca sedan, which is out in Vintage Row 77, if you want to go check it out. It's a beautiful airplane. Buddy's Cub. There was a group, this one's kind of fading, the Happy Champers. So it's kind of like, you know, the Osh badges of honor.
Love it.
And I sort of just end up putting them all in the water bottle. And it rolls around on the floor in the airplane sometimes. And you just, you know, Got to be hydrated here.
Yes,
it's important,
especially for if you imbibe in any after-hours fun at Osh.
Oh yeah, there's none of that. None of that. Absolutely not. So you know, Pete, you've been a pilot for how long?
Let's see. I became a pilot. The joke when I was growing up is I was like flying in utero, and I took my first flight when I was 2 weeks old. Both of my parents were pilots. My dad got into aviation when he was a kid. My grandfather on my dad's side, my dad's dad, he had some general aviation airplanes when my dad was young. He had a Stinson at one point, but the family grew and they sort of got out of little airplanes. So later in life, when he met my mom, they were very into sailing. He was working for a company that had an airplane, and it was a sales company, and their territory was the Delmarva area, so Maryland, Delaware, and Virginia, and D.C., and that's an area that has hellacious traffic, and so they were sort of flying around some to do sales calls. So my dad got his pilot's license because he was exposed to it. My mom also got exposed to it through that. She got her pilot's license. My parents took ground school at the same time. And so I sort of was born into flying. I'm really fortunate and lucky in that way. I very much sort of recognize my privilege in that regard. And to answer your question, I grew up around aviation. My mom had a flight school. She was an air show pilot. And I became a pilot around the time I was 18. I got my private certificate in 2007, and then I got my instrument not long after that. I got my commercial. Sort of the gaps in my flying sort of reflect the gaps in my checkbook. So when I wasn't making a lot of money in local news, I wasn't flying as much. But then, more recently, I got my CFI, so I'm instructing. I'm a double I, so I can teach instruments. I have a multi-commercial. So I love flying more than anything. It's hard to sort of take me away from it. But so I've been flying essentially since I was a teen. And my parents had a Piper Lance. That was the family airplane. And I grew up sort of sitting on phone books. I kind of joke I was an instrument pilot before I was a VFR pilot because I could only see the instruments as a little kid, couldn't see over the top of the panel. So
wow, that's fun.
it was a really great way to grow up.
So your mom was, say that again. She was what kind of pilot was she?
She was an air show pilot.
That's what I remember.
So my mom, her name was Nancy Lynn, and so she was an aerobatic flight instructor and an aerobatic competitor. I fly in aerobatic competitions now, and she traveled the country as an air show pilot. And I announced for her. So we were the only mother-son team in the industry, cool. Which is a really cool way to grow up. That's actually how I got interested in broadcasting, because we'd always get a lot of media coverage at different air shows. And so she was flying in an air show when I was a teen and crashed, and then died later that night. And so when I thought then I was going to a community college, and I thought I was going to sort of run away and join the circus and do the air show thing with my mom forever, which was a bit short-sighted at the time, now I realize. But it sort of launched me into journalism more than anything. And I knew I was interested sort of in the communications field because of the air show work. And then I got connected with Miles O'Brien at CNN, who was a longtime CNNer. And he called me not long after my mom died and said, "You're going to be my summer intern." And so I moved to CNN Center in Atlanta and had a great experience there. I sort of found, I feel like, my aviation was my people, and I found my other people sort of in journalism, and had an amazing experience. And all I have done in my career was try and emulate Miles' career. And he's still a contributor for CNN, and sometimes we're in double boxes on CNN when a big thing happens, which I find to be, it's pretty surreal to sort of share the screen with your mentor. He's a great, and Miles is also a great pilot, too.
That's great.
So, yeah.
That's great. So, what kind of airplane are you flying these days?
I have a Super Decathlon,
nice.
Which is a two-seat aerobatic plane. If you're not familiar with the big fleet of 10,000 airplanes here at Oshkosh, they all have starburst paint schemes. It's covered in fabric. Goes about 130 miles an hour, so it's a decent cross-country airplane. Seats 2, so I can bring my fiance with me. We can go to aerobatic competitions. We can bring a little bit of bags. It's a very capable aerobatic plane. It's certified to +6 and -5 Gs, so flying it in the intermediate category at IAC, International Aerobatic Club competitions, and that I can't get enough of that. It's a lot of fun.
That's great.
Yeah,
that's real cool.
But I'm not doing the air show thing just yet. That was sort of my mom's bailiwick, but I'm hearing the siren song more.
Well, you flew into Oshkosh. You do it every year, pretty much, right?
Yep. I'm camping with the plane in the North 40.
Got Starlink over there to stay on top of stuff. We had to get it for
we didn't buy one ahead of this. We should have.
We got one over our campsite. I tell you, it's a game changer here.
I think I have a buddy who has also a Decathlon, and the airplane has a bit of a skylight.
Yeah, you can.
And so he puts his Starlink on the ceiling and gets Wi-Fi the entire flight. One nice thing about flying is that you leave everything sort of terrestrial, all the concerns on the ground.
Right.
And so it sort of, sadly, the flip side of that is you lose that if you have internet the entire time you're flying. It's kind of nice to be insulated from real life.
It's not quite free in-flight Wi-Fi, but
it's close.
It's close.
Yeah.
Right. It's close. It's close.
Yeah.
Oh.
So what? I'd be curious whether it's on your desktop or somewhere in your computer, if you can divulge, like, what stories right now are in development for you? What are you researching or working on right now? If you can share such things.
The one big story I'm really excited for is I get to fly the Goodyear blimp here at Oshkosh, which is really cool. And we're doing that for CNN, which is a lot of fun. And I'm going to get to pilot the blimp. I've flown on it before. I can't believe that Goodyear went for this, but I sort of said, hey, would it be cool if I got a little stick time in the blimp? And they said, sure. So we're going to do that tonight. It should be a lot of fun. But I'm also working on a few other things. There's so much news. There's no shortage of news on the beat lately.
Yeah.
And so after Oshkosh, there's a 3-day hearing by the NTSB on the DCA mid-air collision on January 29th. I'm sure there will be a ton of news in that. That's sort of something that everyone on the beat will be watching. I'm working on a few things there's so many concerns about the growing issues that drones pose as a tool of terror or war. And so how do you protect large gatherings of people against drones and still filter out bad drones and keep good ones in, so I'm working on something on that. There's always something that will pop up, so I usually have something sort of cooking on the back burner. I just came back from the FAA Training Academy in Oklahoma City, where they train air traffic controllers. There's a huge push to hire air traffic controllers right now. There's 3,000 shortage, controller shortage in the U.S. So that's a huge deal. And things that the Trump administration is doing to sort of try and entice people to the job, keep people from retiring early. So that's something that I just did. And they let me do the tower simulator there, which even as a pilot was pretty hard. It's a good reminder of how tough of a job these controllers have. And many of them are working mandatory 6-day weeks of 10-hour shifts. So, it's a lot of... It's kind of like playing Jenga in 4D, what they do, and it's just really, it's to be able to experience it in the simulator really sort of changes your respect for that job.
I was thinking you might be able to go undercover in the air control tower here and see how that goes.
I won in the tower. I've been coming to Oshkosh since I was a kid, and so the first time I was here, it was the early 2000s, and I knew a controller in the tower, and I got to go up in the old tower, and that was a real hoot. It was before this tower was built. They had a much smaller tower, and it was great.
As we were talking about it, they caught it on the camera. Yeah,
it's
almost like we planned that.
Very fortuitous.
Right?
Yeah. Right. So they're going to have 2 of them here this year.
There was one. Yeah.
And it's the 100th anniversary of the Goodyear blimp, and it's very significant because the fact that it's probably the most successful advertising campaign using an air tool ever. So it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, we actually have someone going up in it on Thursday. That'll be on Oshkosh Live on our Thursday show. But let me tell you, what is the vetting process for being allowed to pilot the blimp? Was there
nicely?
Yeah.
I think they feel okay that I'm not going to, no sudden movements in the blimp are not really possible anyway.
Than the GA airplane.
I asked nicely, and I have a friend of a friend who knows the chief pilot, and it seems that sort of worked out in my favor. So, vetting process, I don't know if I would call it that, but, I think, I'll be under good supervision.
Yeah.
Next up is the Samaritan's Purse DC-8.
Right? Or the 747 SP that
Pratt
came
Whitney,
in.
Yeah,
that was pretty cool.
I'm really excited to see that tomorrow, the DC-8. I mean, that's the only one left. That's in U.S., it's an active service. It's retiring, this year, so...
and we got to see the U-2 fly over yesterday, which was pretty amazing. Yeah. So it's very, Osh is, there's no shortage of special moments here, and that's what makes it so cool and so magical.
Oh, that's absolutely nice. So I want to talk about, media and reporting.
Sure.
So like when on my side of things, our audience is people who are already in aviation, right? And so when I tell the story, I don't have to, it's a different audience.
Right.
But I'm curious, like, how do you because you know a lot about aviation. A lot. And how do you take that and communicate it to more of a mainstream audience?
It's a challenge. It's easy when I'm out covering a story for other pilots I'm speaking to. If they know my background, they switch into aviation language.
Right.
And aviation truly is another language.
It is.
If you look at the pilot controller glossary, which is, like the dictionary for pilots, there are 3,000 terms and about 2,000 of them are acronyms.
Yeah.
So it's really important, I think, to I treat it almost like I'm teaching a brand new flying student. And I've taken students from zero to first solo to their license. I just try to sort of take people from the unknown to the known and speak to them like a normal person. And it really, it can be really tricky to sort of break things down. And the real, rub with that is you don't want to break it down too much to the point that it's inaccurate. You don't want to make it overly simple. And there's a lot of nuance in aviation. And so I really just try to sort of meet people where they're at. And that takes some practice. And but I do really think of it like a flying lesson. I'm just taking somebody from nothing from zero to hero. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Is there any story, or is there a story that comes to mind? One of the things I wanted to ask you was, especially in this universe, how difficult some of these stories must be from just a human POV. What comes to mind, like a story that was particularly just wore on you, was very emotional for you?
I think that the midair over DCA in January was really tough, and I knew people who were out there as part of the search party that night. And I have such a close kinship to that airport. I'm always there doing live shots. It's in the backyard of D.C. I think a lot of people in D.C. have a really closeness to Reagan National Airport just because it's, members of Congress are going through. It's so convenient. It's really an incredible airport with a lot of history. But that was really tough. And I, know the particulars and the closeness of the airspace there. I'm there all the time talking on the topic of the day with pilots who come through and flight attendants who come through, and it's like a little city. It's like a little Richard Scarry storybook. And so I know the TSA agents, and I think it was just very personal to all of us. And having lived through my own tragedy with my mom's crash and seeing that and witnessing that, I know what it's like to sort of be thrust into having to be an expert on something so terrible. And really, that's a huge education when you are a family member. And I really feel for the family members, too, because these are people who are coming back from an ice skating camp in Wichita. There were a lot of kids and families on board, and it's something that was so preventable too. And so that was a gauntlet. And thankfully, props to CNN. They sort of brought in other voices. I was able to sort of do sort of a 12 on, 12 off kind of thing and catch my breath. And that's important also from a journalistic perspective to be able to sort of stand back and say okay, what's really going on here? We knew what happened, but just to have a tiny bit of distance to be able to explain the how and why. So that was really tough. And I think, I've said this before, but I think journalists are really first responders for the First Amendment, and it's really important that we have a protected and free press and stand up to things that aren't true. And there's an era of incredible misinformation, even on this story, something that's so cut and dry. It was tough. It was a tough rub, and I'm grateful. I have a lot of support, and aviation is like my family, and a lot of people were calling and texting. I had 200 text messages that night.
Same.
It was really incredible. So,
we were just talking before we got on air about this, and like you, I grew up at that airport. I spent 10 years volunteering there, and got to know a lot of people within the authority and within the. Like you said, you see the same TSA agents when I fly out now. 10 odd years later. And it really hit close to home. But you have to you have to sort of separate it out, right, and say, I have to cover this for the audience and dig deep and see what's going on. But in the same vein, you're like, wow, that's.
Yeah, I will say in a way that to be able to cover it, it was important for me to be able to sort of channel my emotion. And I've done so much work on my own trauma with my mom's crash, but to be able to sort of tap into that and sort of put myself in the shoes of somebody who is really close, not far away on the periphery, really close on the periphery, and what would they want to know? How can you stand up for them? Can you advocate for people who are trying to find information? And so, in some ways, my background, as bad as it may be in some ways, is really important and educational. It's important to sort of channel those emotions too, I think, into good work.
Well, one person I've talked to after that accident quite a bit is, I'm sure you have too, is Tim Liley.
Yeah.
The father of the first officer on the PSA flight. And his story is incredible.
Yeah, and he has a flying background.
He's a Black Hawk pilot.
Right.
Flew out of the Pentagon. He flew CRJs briefly.
Yep.
And I think he's kind of turned into a sounding board, I think, for a lot of those families to try to make sense of what is going on. It's still crazy to me today that happened. I've flown the 3-3 approaches you have so many times as a passenger.
I think the thing that is the most troubling to me when it comes to this incident is that a lot of warning signs were there.
Right.
And, in all of 2023, we covered near miss after near miss after near miss at plenty of large terminal area airports, not necessarily involving airplanes and helicopters, and not with some of the special circumstances that were sort of baked into the helicopter routes and the intersection of approaches at DCA, but there's so many warning signs, and I think aviation is at a really important inflection point right now when those things come up, and now there's just another new near miss in North Dakota involving a B-52 and a SkyWest flight. It's really important, I think, aviation to its merit, top to bottom, takes a step back and looks at how do we inspect this, how do we make this better. It's not to lay blame or point fingers. It's to figure out what went wrong and how to make it a thing that has become a headline, an irregularity, something that has not happened with a lot of frequency.
And I just asked Chair Hamidi from the NTSB when she was on, after that was the DCA incident and this most recent one, and there's been others in between, what can the FAA do? What do they think the FAA can do to help that symbiosis, I like to call it, between military and GA, anything civilian? And that's starting to become more of a site. I mean, you're a pilot. You know that sometimes when they're not broadcasting or...
The thing that has stood out to me is, the ADSB mandate, which went into place in 2020. Everybody in aviation had to have ADSB out, the ability to broadcast out in many airports, near many airports and in many classes of airspace. The military has its own, essentially, ability to sort of waive that. They don't have to put that out if it's for mission criticality. And so, I think there needs to be some changes there, and it seems like that's happening. And, coming into the most busy airspace in the world here right now, we're all using ADSB. We're all being able to follow the airplane in front of us and see the tail number and what they're doing and which way they're going. It's one of the reasons why the arrival procedures at Oshkosh are so successful and so safe. So, hopefully there is some regulatory change when it comes to that.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add there?
No, I mean, that was I wanted to ask that question, and now just thinking about that happening in our collective backyard, with your own personal story, it's like that confluence of that moment is kind of extraordinary that it even happened, that you were the person to be the voice there for that.
I mean, I was sitting at home on my couch, and that makes it sound like I was waiting for something bad to happen. That's not what I was doing. I had just done a story that day. My fiance and I were watching TV. I got a phone call from a friend who is at the DC Fire Department, and I was like, why is he calling me at this hour at 9 p.m.? And then I got a call from our assignment desk saying, hey, we think a plane went down in the Potomac. You need to come in. Thankfully, I live really close to the office, and so I was on TV almost right away.
Yeah.
And that was important, especially in the initial period when we didn't really know much, to sort of just do the observational journalism and say, this is what we're looking at, this is what may have happened, and you really need to walk people through it by the hand without speculating. And that's a really tough thing especially in this environment where people on YouTube can go up immediately and put out and say things that aren't very measured. It's really, really important to have the standards that we have and that so many journalists have.
Well, yeah, and I like you, I was sitting on my couch.
Right.
It was at my time it was an hour before, and I was scrolling through. I'm still very active in the DC, plane spot or Facebook, pilot communities, whatever. And so I was seeing this stuff, and I was seeing these chatter about a lot of vehicles were headed to DCA, and I was like, maybe it's an aircraft alert. Normally those go to Dulles, though.
Maybe it's a drill.
Maybe it's a drill, or maybe it was a smaller accident involving something else in the river. My mind didn't want to believe it at first. That's where I was. I was in denial for a long time that there was an airliner until as the night went on into the wee odd hours of the morning there, it started to become very clear.
Yeah, and we all know the history of DC. In that the Air Florida crash of 1982, and that plane ended up hitting the 14th Street Bridge. That was a horrible tragedy also, and that is something that is so baked into the local history and in aviation history too. And so, there were a lot of echoes there in some ways, and I think, it's hard to ignore.
Yeah, you're right. So you're a flight instructor, and I was talking to Chair Hamidi earlier about this, but you have a younger generation coming into the aviation now. And with that, how do what do you think from a flight instructor side? Like, what's the way to build your curriculum now around that greener sort of individual?
That's interesting. I think that aviation it really needs to rise to the occasion now because there's so many shortages, not only of pilots, also of air traffic controllers, also of maintenance technicians. We need people. And so that's why something like Oshkosh is so important, and air shows are so important, because in a very fenced off, reality of aviation now in a post 9/11 world, where someone from my dad's or mom's generation could almost go up and touch an airplane very easily and access it with not a lot of barriers. Now it's become much harder, and so air shows are the best way, I think, for the public to experience aviation, to smell it, to feel it, to taste it. It is really incredible. That's why Oshkosh is also so important. To have AirVenture, to have 750,000 people here over a week is just something that's so, from every part of the world is so key. So I would say that, the biggest thing, I wouldn't discourage any young person from aviation. I think now is a great time to take a flying lesson. If you're a parent or a aunt or uncle or a grandparent or you're a mentor, get somebody a discovery flight. And I think that, there is going to be a lot of change. The technological change is really, really good. In some ways, it makes flying easier and in a way more accessible. We're in the Redbird booth right now. These simulators, the fidelity is so incredible. These are FAA certificated. These simulators can be used as a facsimile for instrument flying. You can keep your currency up on it. I have a friend who teaches a high school class in Northern California where they recently got a bunch of these simulators, and so it's a way to sort of meet people where they're at. It's essentially bringing aviation to the classrooms. It's a pretty incredible thing. Yeah. But I think it's important for every sort of young person to have a bit of aviation literacy, and hopefully young people sort of see that there is a lot of growth opportunity in aviation. Oh, and by the way, it's really cool and fun.
Oh yeah, there's that. There's that part too.
It's amazing. And so, and I think when it comes to the curriculum of teaching, the technology is good, but you can't ignore the fundamentals.
Right.
And so many incidents are still caused by loss of control. That's the top killer of pilots in the United States. To fly airplanes and to have really good tactile feel of what an airplane can do and where the full edges of the envelope are, you do learn that generally in smaller airplanes, and you can replicate it in some ways in simulators. But you don't want to sort of brush that aside and go too fast, I think. So it's a tough balance.
Nothing can beat hands-on experience.
That's true.
And I think sometimes, especially in the commercial side of it, where there's this Part 120 or the Part 121 side, there's death by PowerPoint sometimes, and nothing can beat it. And Chair Hominy made this point, and I thought it was interesting. It's like, the hands-on learning part is super important.
Yeah, and I think in general aviation, we try to take a lot from what is happening, try to learn a lot from what's happening in the professional flying world.
Right.
And the cool thing about Oshkosh is that it's a lot of pilots flying very professionally coming in here, but you don't have to be a professional to fly like one. And so I think that is really, really key and sort of showed off in an incredible way at a place like this.
Pete, thank you so much
for
sharing your story.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for sharing your stories. All of it. We'll also be keeping an eye on the blimp and for any dramatic movements in the air.
Yeah, it's 5:30 Central Time today.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
So it's not just one blimp; it's a two-ship of blimps that we're going up and a photo plane. So it should be really neat.
Awesome.
Very cool.
Thank you so much,
thanks,
Pete.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming around.
Yeah.